And now to a detailed look at an increasingly brutal battlefield in Ukraine. Stephanie Sy has that.
Judy, that is the way to put it. In recent days, the Russian attack against Ukraine has intensified. It has become more indiscriminate, with scores of Ukrainian civilians killed and vast swaths of infrastructure, residential and commercial buildings, even hospitals and schools destroyed. For a closer examination of Russia's tactics, I'm joined by Michael Kaufman, Senior Fellow for Russian Studies at the CNA Center for Naval Analyses. Michael Kaufman, thank you for joining the NewsHour as always. With the bombing of that maternity hospital in Mariupol, are we seeing a concerted change in tactics by Russian forces? And what can the Ukrainians do to defend against such tactics?
I'm afraid we are, and I think folks like me predicted early on that this war is going to get a lot more ugly, and unfortunately that much of the worst is yet to come in this conflict. We've been seeing the Russian military revert to using artillery fire, multiple launch rocket systems, and a lot of indiscriminate shelling of civilian areas, particularly where they get involved in urban warfare. Urban warfare is very difficult. It consumes armies and forces. Russian military often relies on firepower, overwhelming firepower, and we've seen throughout this conflict, particularly in the last week, which is really the second week of this war, heavy shelling of civilian areas and the urban environments with, I think, increasingly growing civilian casualties.
As you said, Michael, some of this you predicted that it would get uglier, as you say. It has been 2 weeks, though, since the invasion. What is surprising you about what you're seeing on the battlefield?
Well, the Russian military has had a number of setbacks. They've definitely not made the progress they hoped they would make. And the Ukrainian military has shown an immense resolve. They've fought hard. That being said, unfortunately, if you look on the overall map, you will see the Russian military slowly but steadily, perhaps fitfully, progressing, trying to complete an encirclement of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and where they are frustrated, intentionally switching to tactics of barraging urban areas like Kharkiv, or maybe Mariupol, to try to compel the civilian population to leave and to try to signal maybe to other cities that they should surrender or capitulate to a Russian encirclement. On the whole, the war where we are now, unfortunately, is very indeterminate. That is, we are much closer to the beginning of it than we are towards the end.
You mentioned some of those major cities that are encircled, including Kharkiv. Does it surprise you how long it is taking for Russians to seize and hold territory? We are hearing, for example, reports from the field that Russian troops in some cases are abandoning their vehicles, that they are using unencrypted comms on the field. Are they disorganized, and how much is that going to affect the overall outlook of this war?
Absolutely. The initial campaign is absolutely shambolic. They had not prepared for a large-scale military operation. In cases like Kharkiv, they actually have not encircled the city. Ukrainians have successfully counterattacked there. They have enveloped cities like Mariupol. They're trying to encircle cities like Mykolaiv. What's really happening on the Russian fight is that it's not been a well-organized effort. They have logistics problems, and as they went into the war, they didn't psychologically or materially prepare their troops. In fact, in all honesty, they lied to them and they pushed them into Ukraine. And that's why we've seen cases of desertion. We've seen a lot of vehicles abandoned. Some of them are due to logistical problems, but some of them are clear-cut case of unit desertion on the battlefield due to low morale. Whereas Ukraine, while outmatched conventionally in terms of qualitative level of equipment, those fighters have strong resolve. They're fighting for something.
That leads me to the question of whether Russia can really achieve its ultimate political objective of controlling Ukraine, especially as we see dead soldiers, wounded Russian soldiers now in the thousands.
That's a great question. So the truth is that given the bad assumptions with which they went into the war, an operation which was an attempt at quick regime change, in which they got a bloody nose and had to reconfigure into a large-scale military operation that you now see them making big adjustments and trying to prosecute. From my point of view, I am very skeptical that they can achieve their political objectives. And don't get me wrong, they can achieve military victories, they can achieve battlefield victories. But I think in many respects, a lot of their assumptions simply had little bearing on reality. Now, they've switched to much more brutal forms of warfare. They are resourcing a military effort, but it's ultimately behind a failed strategy. And I have deep skepticism that they can achieve the political objectives in this war.
So how long do you expect this war to last, Michael?
And I'm afraid my answer is going to be very unsatisfactory. Wars are highly contingent, and I know many people are watching this war, they're living it day by day, or if you're following like me, maybe hour by hour. But the truth is that this war could go on. It could go on for weeks. It could go on for months. I do suspect that at the rate of sort of losses of manpower and material, Russian forces could probably be exhausted within a couple weeks, but the war won't end. Maybe an operational pause to resupply, reorganize. Ceasefires often are ways by which both sides rearm and then continue the conflict in a different phase. I think the first chapter of this war is likely to close in the coming weeks, but this war may be here to stay, may be here with us for quite some time, much longer than we would wish it to be.
Michael Kofman, Senior Fellow for Russian Studies at the Center for Naval Analyses. Thank you, as always, for joining the NewsHour.
Thanks for having me on your program.